Hello and welcome to this session on mental well-being during the time of lockdown. I'm Caroline Stockman, Chief Executive of the Association of Corporate Treasurers, and I have three wonderful panelists with me today to talk about the stresses that they've experienced and their teams have experienced, and also the coping mechanisms they have for that. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce them, and I'm going to go alphabetically, in this case, first of all to Agnes. So Agnes, could you give a little bit of background on who you are, who you work for, and the context of the current situation today in terms of how you and your business operations are affected and what your focus has been?
Sure, absolutely. Hi, everyone. So I'm Agnès Favillier. I am Treasury Director at Sage, and in my free time, I'm also President of the ACT. It has been quite interesting, I'd say, the last couple of months. As a business, I think Sage is very well equipped actually to operate remotely. And it was normal practice, actually, even before the crisis, for most of the teams to work from home at some point in time. Obviously, it was never that sustained and for such a long period of time, but we had the right technology and the right kind of mindset to be able to work remotely. So I would say from that respect, it's been quite easy for us actually to work from home. And I think all of the business is actually working from home in our different locations. I think what we have seen across the business is obviously the challenges of, working from home and not having really any hard stops as you would have when you have a commute at the beginning and the end of the day. I presume that's what the other panelists will see as well.
Thanks very much, Agnes. And we'll move over to Gronya in New York. Gronya.
Hi, Caroline. Thank you very much. So yeah, it's been a hectic 6 weeks, I would say. I'm coming to you from Brooklyn, New York, which was the epicenter of the epicenter, shall we say, of COVID-19. And so it was a very, I think, personally testing time for everybody, certainly in my community. I think from a business point of view, we actually, like Agnes said, we coped actually pretty well. So I work for EY. I'm a partner in their capital markets practice. So the clients that I serve are in the financial services industry. I work with the banks. And so our clients perhaps, were also very well tested as it related to business resilience and recovery. Obviously, they'd worked through many disasters like 9/11 and Hurricane Sandy and the financial crisis. And so people had plans, but as they say, often the first casualty of war is the plan. And so those plans didn't necessarily cope for a global pandemic where people couldn't just resort to their disaster recovery sites, and they did have to work from home for a sustained period of time. So many of our clients were struggling. I would say the first several weeks were definitely about getting the technology in place, making sure people could actually operate. And the last several weeks, I think the shift has been more towards sustainability, just like Agnes had said. How do we actually continue to thrive? How do we take care of our people? How do we manage productivity and efficiency? And how do we make sure we have an inclusive environment where we're still, making sure that people, maintain their sense of connectivity to the organization, and what can we do to make that better over the longer term?
Thanks very much, Gronya. And we're now going to move over to the Middle East. And James, the same question to you, if you could give us a little bit of background, please.
Great. Thank you very much, Caroline, and hello, everybody. So I'm James Adams. I'm the Group Treasurer of Shalhoub Group. I'm based over here in Dubai for the last 6 years, where we set up a new treasury for Shalhoub. We're one of the leading luxury firms in the region in terms of retail and distribution. So we've clearly been very affected by the whole COVID situation, with many of our stores closed down. We've actually found that we've been able to adapt to that faster than we expected. So actually, with all our staff going to home, that was a big test, but the technology has been great, and we've actually had a lot of learnings, as I'm sure you all have, and it's been a lot smoother than we anticipated. So that's been very helpful from that perspective.
Thank you very much. So now we'll get a little bit more personal. So we'll start this question with you, James. If you could tell us a little bit about how you think personally your resilience and that of your team over the last 7 to 8 weeks, how that's been tested, and how much those factors around the people, the team, have played into that.
Yeah, it's clearly been very demanding from a treasury perspective. So I think we've been busier than perhaps at any other point in our careers, for at least many of us, for what we can remember. There's been a lot of demands in terms of cash visibility, in terms of what we give to the main board, in terms of coming up with some quite demanding deadlines and turnaround times. I mean, our team have been working very late hours into the evening. I think with all of us being out of the office as well, that's exacerbated that. So for us, staying in touch as a team has been very important, having that human touch, that personal connection to sort of get through that and ride the storm. But yeah, just generally we've been coming together as a team and working together from that perspective. I think we found many coping mechanisms to get through. So we have a team meeting every week. We have a team breakfast. We have a quiz now, so we have some fun time. I think ironically the team is actually perhaps closer than it was beforehand, because now we need to be intentional with our time. Whereas beforehand we could be a group of people in the office, but perhaps it was more task focused, less people. So it has had some silver linings from that perspective.
It's fascinating, isn't it, how, as you say, there can be benefits as well as the downsides. Maybe moving over to Agnes to continue talking about the stresses on Treasury teams. What is it that you've experienced, and how much has it been around the people rather than the tasks?
Yeah, absolutely. I think my experience is quite similar to James's, in that as a team, we suddenly got extremely busy, first of all, with just maintaining the BAU and not having the luxury of necessarily being together with our colleagues in the office where we can see them, but also dealing with all of the additional requests from the board, from all sorts of stakeholders in the business, and then obviously also planning for any contingency linked to COVID-19 and you know the impact it could have on the business. And so I think from a personal level, especially the first month, I found it quite difficult, as I said earlier, to not have a commute. And I think it's a blessing and a curse at the same time, because obviously not being in public transport and, you know, in the London public transport, it's quite nice not to have to do that every day. But it also removes all of the kind of beginning and end of the day. And so for probably the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks, it just felt like I was just working constantly, and the lines get blurred between a work day and a weekend. And because you're stuck at home, then you might as well do some work, because you know there's so much to do. And so I found that quite difficult at the start. It's a bit more quiet now, and we're more into the BAU phase. I think most of the contingency planning and stuff has been sorted for now anyway. So it's relatively easier now, I think. In terms of what we do as a team, we have regular catch-ups anyway on the different projects we're working on, and then we have regular team meetings, more so than when we were in the office, definitely. And I think Sage has been particularly good at organizing things for the different teams. So we have quite regular kind of coffee breaks that are organized by our UK business, for instance, or our CFO. We've got things called Sage Live, where it's our different ExCo members will kind of give an update to all of our colleagues across the globe on business, on other things. It can just be very informal as well. We have coffee breaks. We've got drinks after work. We don't have quizzes yet, but hopefully that's coming. So there have been many things that have been developed to try and make sure that the colleagues feel like they're still working together, still linked, and even if we don't see each other face to face, and you know, we still have this kind of interaction on a regular basis.
No, it's interesting, isn't it? And how you're getting to know people even better than before. So, for instance, we're experiencing your wonderful wallpaper behind you, Agnes. And then you, of course, I'm sharing one of my walks. Often involves latterly, because the bluebells have been out. So that's the bluebells near us in the woods. But I think also for speaking to the two treasurers on the panel, I wonder sometimes, well, whether it's in terms of the kind of people's mental health. We know people are saying don't watch too much news, don't get too involved in all of that, because it can just drag you down if you're just constantly following the news, and there seem to be so many kind of pessimistic stories out there. But I wonder also, because of the nature of your work in Treasury, you're actually having to look at all your plans, your forecasts going forward. You're seeing how bad it could be. Actually, you're managing your financial risk. So you're looking at what could the worst case be and what could the best case be, etc., etc. And just before I move on to Grania, I just wondered from yourselves, Agnes and James, whether you think that has played a part in this kind of what do they call it, the COVID coaster of people's emotions playing through.
Yeah, I mean,
Oh, sorry, go ahead, James.
I think from my perspective as leaders, we need to make sure that we're level-headed as well, and we keep things into perspective. I think the first couple of weeks were perhaps the most challenging for me, just because there was so much uncertainty. I think once we'd passed that and we'd updated our cash flow forecast, we could see what was happening. It was then perhaps easier to reassure us and communicate. I think communication is one big aspect to all of this, making sure that you do communicate to all of your people and they're aware of what's going on, they're updated, and at least they have that reassurance. So it's not the best of times, and it is difficult, but again, I'm sure we'll get through this together, and it's just about keeping people up to date and being open and transparent. It's the best way forward with all your stakeholders.
Indeed, really, really important. It's that also transparency of decision making, why you came to a conclusion, bringing people along with you. That's really, really important to do. Agnes?
Yeah, I would really agree with James. I think what I'm very conscious of is also the different sectors that we may operate in as treasurers. And I think for me, actually, working in the tech industry, it has been okay. As an industry, we're not as impacted as others, like airlines or manufacturers, etc. So for us, once we realized, or once we assessed what the risks were, and actually realized that we understand the risk and we can cope with it, then I think the main worry had passed, and we have a much clearer idea of what risks we're looking at. I realized that for other companies it may be actually a lot more stressful even now, because of we're still in lockdown and things can be quite difficult and have a very, very big impact on different businesses. So I think it's very much a sector or company view rather than a similar view across all treasurers.
Yeah, definitely will have an impact. And moving on to Grania, your thoughts, because of course you've got your own team, your own organisation, but you've also got all those interfaces with your clients who work very closely with our treasurers, of course. Can I hand over to you now to give us a little bit of what's been on your mind through all of this?
Yeah, absolutely, Caroline. So yeah, I agree with Anya's comments. It can be sector specific, and the sector that we support obviously is the financial services sector, and so that sector was very stressed in terms of the market volatility, coming off the back of the crisis, and also just the relocation of trading to people's homes. We'd never done that before. We'd never at large deployed traders to their homes and had to supervise their activities in completely different ways. And so there was also, of course, the need to respond to all of the various Treasury programs here in the United States to respond to the crisis, and the banks, of course, administering all of that. So incredibly stressful for our clients. And so from an EY perspective, I think for us, we were trying to be helpful. We were trying to find out, what are the most appropriate ways to interact and serve our clients in these times. And I think it's been interesting because I would say we got into a rhythm pretty quickly, which is great. And we also found that, our company was actually very resilient at working from home. We consultants are used to being on the road, they're used to traveling. Our culture was one that could sustain people being remote and having those connection points remotely. That being said, I do think there were some very specific things obviously about this particular scenario, given that some of our people obviously were working from small apartments, had multiple roommates that they had to deal with who were also trying to work from home. I myself had children in distance learning, and they're still in virtual learning, they're doing their schoolwork from home. So people were balancing, some people of course had illness in their home. Some people were directly impacted by the COVID virus, and so taking care of loved ones who were sick. So what I would say is it was a massive test of resilience. I think this process was not linear. I mean, I definitely agree that it felt like a roller coaster some days. We felt like, we're sort of having the same meeting 10 times and not moving forward. So we were trying to over communicate. And I think now we've sort of settled into a groove of, what is normal. I definitely agree with your point about, some silver linings is that, I think we have more trust and more intimacy with our teams and our clients, because we are getting to this sort of, sneak peek into kind of how they really are and how they live. And I say that with respect for, again, for people's privacy, and not meaning to sort of intrude. And we've been quite careful about that in our teams to sort of allow people to show up, as they are, and sort of do what they can.
Oh, thanks, Grania. And it is that's getting to know people. I'm really finding that a fascinating part of this, and a really enjoyable part of it. And then even like now we can see each other. I find it more difficult when people are on calls and you can't see the face. But when you can, I can really get engaged as if we're in the same room together. It's just a kind of adaptation, which is fascinating. We're very flexible, we human beings, I think. So we've got a little bit of time, and I'd like to ask a kind of unscripted question, if that's okay with you, but I'll give you some time to think about it while I go first. And the question is really around yourself personally. If you think back to the beginning of lockdown, say, what was the thing that you were struggling with most then? And maybe now, what's the thing that you're now struggling with the most? And what are your coping mechanisms personally, if you're willing to share? And if I think back, I think at first it was just I was working flat out, and I went for a period of, I think it was 6 or 7 days, where I never actually left this room, except for to be in the kitchen to cook. And I was just worrying about how I get deliveries, because we're locked down. My mother has Alzheimer's, we can't go anywhere, and so on. So that was the big thing. And I think now it's just making sure I get enough sleep, because I'm not out and about, I'm constantly not feeling I'm doing enough, so I'm wanting to do other things. I've always been a bit like this, but it's then exacerbated, so it's how I get sleep. So, but for me, the mechanisms that I use to help counter both of those is to share things like, we have an app at work, which is the ACT kind of Move app, and so I have to record my walks on it. It follows me where I'm going, and it means that I've got evidence out there if I haven't been walking, and that kind of keeps me stricter to it. It kind of forces my hand, if you like. And I think with all of these things, and the sleep as well, it's planning, and it's being firm with yourself and saying, I'm actually going to do it at this time. I am going to go to bed, and I'm going to and work out how many hours there are to that, because we talk about this on another session, ITW, about the importance of sleep, and but I'm still learning. I'm not getting it all right. Those are my personal challenges. So maybe I could move to Grania. Would you like to talk to us about yours? Would you mind?
Sure, absolutely, Caroline. I mean, I definitely can relate to having felt extremely overwhelmed in the first several weeks of the crisis, and also having a huge sense of sort of the burden of the world, right? So I felt the massive inequity in terms of how this crisis was playing out, in particular here in New York City. I think it shone some very big lights on sort of issues of social justice and racial justice in this country, and particularly acutely where I live in Brooklyn. And so I felt the need to be of service. I felt like many people, unsure how to be of service and how to help. But I'm fortunate enough that I chair the board of the New York Women's Foundation, which is a very large public foundation here in New York that serves women and girls. And I just pulled a whole lot of more people in to try to help us surge some funding into that organization to try to help. So being of service definitely helped me. I find it hard now to maintain discipline also on the schedule. Like others, I definitely feel my workday bleeds into my whole life. And so I do find it difficult to maintain that sense of discipline and order, and plan and having a plan. I'm also extraordinarily extroverted, so I really miss human connection. I agree with you. We're remarkably adaptable, and I've adapted to this environment, but I miss people. I miss the creativity that comes from having different people in a room looking at a problem together. It's harder to do things that are innovative and creative, I think, through this medium, for me at least right now. And so what do I do to cope? I try to run. Running helps me. It helps me to feel like it's a linear progression. If I decide to go for 3 miles, I go for 3 miles and it's done, and I feel like I've achieved 3 miles. So running helps. And then of course, obviously trying to maintain the connectivity with other people through the methods that we have to just feed that extroverted side of me.
Thanks, Gloria. Who would have guessed you're an extrovert, eh? And moving over to James, please.
Yeah, I think for me, what you've both said resonates a lot. So it's just such a huge change going from working in the office to working at home, and everything's turned upside down. So I think at first I found I was on conference calls all day, every day for the first week or so, and just sitting in my same chair at home. I quickly realised that's not as comfortable as being in the office. So it's a bit like taking an economy flight every day for 5-6 hours. So I've adapted quite well now to that. So I'm making sure that I do get up, take the breaks, walk around. I can actually take calls from my iPhone, the iPad, the laptop, so I don't have to be stuck in one place. So I've got a lot smarter in terms of working from home. So that's helped me a lot. I've got my Apple Watch as well, so I can obviously track how much exercise I'm doing and make sure we get into that routine. I think it's a lot easier now. So I think it's just the disruption that was the most challenging part. I think now that I'm more used to working from home, it's become a lot easier. I've got a routine set up. I make sure that I'm exercising every day. I touched upon some of the things our team are doing, but we're also doing team exercise. So each week, someone in our team is choosing a new exercise to do. So we've done Zumba, yoga, we've done aerobics, and these are all first for me, but they're a fun way to stay in touch with the team and also to stay fit as well. So yeah, it's just getting used to the routine, I would say, and getting equipped to properly work at home, getting a decent desk and a chair and everything else. It's the priorities.
Yeah. Well, I hope you're recording some of those sessions, James, because I'm really looking forward to seeing you doing some Zumba. Yeah.
My wife finds it hysterical, don't worry.
Very good. Agnes.
Yeah, I think similar to you, I think, and to the other panelists, really, it's at first it was quite difficult it felt like I was just working all the time and stuck in my loft. My husband probably had the virus, so I had to live in my loft for 2 weeks, pretty much full time, and so work there, sleep there, etc. So that was quite a challenge, and such an abrupt kind of new way of living, really, and coming to terms with not being able to go to the museums or theatre or the stuff that we normally do in our free time. I think, though, what helped me was always to think, well, I'm so grateful that actually I knew that my job wasn't at risk. And I know I'm very fortunate in that way. I know for a lot of people, not only they have the stress of being of self-isolating, but also they will have financial worries and all sorts of other things. And I've always really tried to keep that in mind, because I know I'm very fortunate in many, many ways. I think how I'm coping now, like you and the other panelists, actually, and James and Gronia, I also have a Fitbit that I managed to dig out of my wardrobe at some point. So I make sure that I go outside. I run quite a lot, so I try and make sure I run every day to have this time outdoors, because it makes such a big difference. I also got myself a piano, because I've played music for so long, and actually it's one of the things that I know helps me stay sane. So I'm trying to fit in some piano practice every day as well. And then last but not least, I actually downloaded Headspace, the mindfulness app, which is excellent and has so many things on there, from mindfulness to things to help you sleep. They've got some exercises and like physical exercises on there as well, which I think is really helpful.
Well, thank you very much. It's been brilliant to talk to you all today, and got some really interesting insights there. And but as you say, maybe we are, well, for sure we're more fortunate than many people. And so I hope for those, particularly those who are struggling with the mental and physical health issues at this time, can think find some of our comments helpful. Because that's the purpose of today's session. And I'd just like to thank you all again, James, Gronia, Agnes, for joining, for being so open. For everyone on this session, do look after yourselves, because the only way we can do more in the world and do more to help others is to stay safe ourselves and stay sane. So please do think of that and take care of yourselves, and thank you very much.